Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll get back to one of our questions.
Okay.
Here's another thing that I see people have a hard time distinguishing between hearing and listening. They think it's the same thing. And my experience is that they're very different. I mean, they're connected, but they're different. Just being hearing and learning. Can you give us a distinction? What's the difference?
Well, yeah, this is one of my challenges too, to become everybody wants to be a better listener, and it's a real challenge. I found very few tales about this one, but what I can say is hearing is biological. My dog can hear me. Okay.
Right.
But if we add interpretations, we go back to listening. That's one of my picks ups, Yeah, so one's biological, but listening is about interpretations. It came from it was the engineers and the transmitters and receivers, and they, that's the model for all that. And so if I'm speaking, then you're the listener, right? And what do we do? Like the machinery stuff just duplicates it, huh?
Right.
But we human beings do something a little different. When we're going from one to the other, we are adding our interpretations. So machines don't have interpretations.
Right. They just, whatever hits. So
yeah, that's right.
A different way I've heard that, that was a great distinction, by the way, but a different way I've heard what you just said described as listening is active. It's action because of the interpretation, because you're giving your interpretation, it's active, it's not passive. And most people see listening as passive. Well, I heard what you said. Yeah, but you didn't listen to you didn't get any of it. Yeah, you heard the words, but you didn't listen.
They don't have the same interpretation you do.
Right.
That's why
which is why perspective, or as you say, your paradigm is so important. And again, the older I get, the more I see that your perspective is your reality.
So let me give you a good piece here.
Please.
Okay. So where do our interpretations come from? They come from
what we think we already know, usually. Yeah.
Yeah, it comes from your beliefs.
Right.
That's where you get it from. Another place you get your piece is your emotions and your moods. So when you speak, your words are going this way. There's nothing I can do about them. They're gone. But you add your interpretations, your beliefs, your moods and emotions, and then you speak back to me with that. So it's your interpretation that you go from beliefs, emotions, and the moods. That's where you're pulling in your interpretations. Those are your interpretations.
Right. And so again, you're listening, or the interpretation you give to it, again, from a business perspective, you can have all kinds of chaos if you have people listening from different perspectives. So, how do you what's the word I want to look for? How do you work with that? How do you work with that?
That's a puzzle. I think then you have to go back and say, you say you're listening to that, or you receive it, so to speak. Then you have to say which one is more effective in there or less effective, so to speak. It'd be like your emotions, what emotion you were in. So you have to kind of go back up to there. I draw a little a rainbow kind of thing that put that emotions, moods, and beliefs. And it goes through all of those three from here. And I'm listening already. You see, you spoke them, and then I'm listening back here. And if I don't have a good mood right now, I won't listen to the thing.
Right.
So it's challenging.
So to some extent, do you have to, if you want to be effective at communication, if you want to be listened to well, you
Mhm.
have to take some amount of responsibility for who you're speaking to. In other words, you have to be able to listen to their listening and speaking to that rather than maybe deliver it the way you're most comfortable with.
Yeah. And I think what I would say in my term that I kind of made up, so to speak, I need to get down on that person's level.
Right.
I don't, a scientist doesn't address something that an attorney does. Are you on the same level as the person that just spoke? That's big for me. That's big for me. So you may or may not use this in your work here, but I need to say this because I felt so good when I realized, Jesus talked in parables.
Right.
He was talking to fishermen and taxmen, and so and he had to get down to their level to have that listening piece that we need.
So he was, said a different way, Jesus is speaking into their listening, into the listening of the people he was talking to by using, what do you want to call it? Some form of communication that they could relate to with the parables.
Right.
Rather than just coming out and saying, no, this is the way it is.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
and-
That makes sense.
And it's also in another way that we covered, and it's we don't have the same distinctions that other people have.
Right.
Like a distinction is like I say, look at the floor, and you look at the floor. I say, look at the ceiling, you look at the ceiling. We have distinctions in our community. I'm sitting in a chair, another one, and that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Well, here's a different way of looking at it.
Okay.
You wouldn't talk to one of your children the way you would talk to one of your parents.
Okay.
You wouldn't talk to your boss the same way as you talk to a subordinate or say a coworker.
Right.
You wouldn't talk to your spouse the way you would talk to a total stranger. All those are different. And again, the relationships are different, and there's some background of obviousness that each may have and all that stuff. And they're different. You have different concerns for whom you're speaking to depending on who you're talking to. And again, my learning was that you have some responsibility about speaking into the listening that you perceive the other person. In other words, you have to speak into what's going on in their head. You can't talk to a teenager as though they were like a 50-year-old. They're not going to hear you.
No, right.
They're just not.
And they don't have the same distinctions.
Well, they have the same distinctions, and they're listening to a totally different conversation than say somebody who's married, 50-something years old, has grown kids, successful business. Very different internal monologue compared to say a teenager who's worried about looking good, being cool, having a boyfriend, girlfriend, latest music, whatever, video games, whatever they listen to these days. I'm so in touch with that.
No, me too. Hey, Lordy.
Okay. So again, if you could talk to whatever business owner is looking in here, what would you say is the most effective action they could take for their business? I don't know, not necessarily this instant, but out of our conversation, out of what they've heard you say, what's the most effective action they could take out of all that for their business?
Trust.